Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating, deeply philosophical lecture. It makes some absolutely bold claims about the root causes of modern human suffering, the role of religion, and ultimately, the destiny of South Korea. It's this profound, highly structured argument that completely redefines what it actually means to be sick in the modern world. Okay, let's dive into this. To grasp this whole complex narrative, we're going to break it down step by step. First step, the limits of religion. Second, knowledge versus true wisdom. Third, South Korea's historical mission. Fourth, the generational sacrifices. And finally, curing the confused soul. All right, Section 1, the limits of religion. The source material actually begins by framing a really universal human experience. And it's a highly relatable question, right? Where do we turn when life just becomes unbearably difficult? According to the lecture, when our lives fall apart and we become sort of patients of life, we instinctively seek out spiritual guidance. Historically, as the source points out, people seeking relief have flocked to a few main destinations. We're talking Christianity, Buddhism, Taoism, and even shamans or independent spiritual guides. Now, the speaker argues that people don't go to these places because their life is going perfectly, right? They go out of sheer desperation. They're hurting, and they are literally hoping beyond hope to find an actual cure for their suffering. But the lecture suggests they just aren't finding what they need there. The speaker is actually sharply critical of how modern religious institutions operate, which brings us to this incredibly provocative quote. The church is a special academy. You pay a base fee, tithes, and the price keeps going up without teaching real truth. The source essentially argues that religions have largely devolved into transactional institutions. So instead of researching the root causes of human pain and offering genuine healing, they just pass down old, rigid doctrines while demanding blind obedience and, well, your money. Now, what's really interesting about this next part is Section 2, knowledge versus true wisdom. To really get the speaker's core philosophical argument, we have to look at their highly specific definition of truth, or jinri. In this context, truth isn't some divine decree just magically handed down from the sky. Instead, it's the active discovery of the right universal laws for human life. And crucially, finding this truth requires continuous, dedicated research into the human condition, rather than just blindly accepting old dogmas. So the crucial point here is this stark contrast. On one hand, we have knowledge, jishik. The speaker views this as stagnant information from the past. The kind of things you'd find in old texts like the Bible or Buddhist sutras. And sure, schools and modern religions are very good at teaching this stagnant knowledge. But on the other hand, we have truth, jinri. These are the evolving, universal answers that actually solve people's real-life suffering. The speaker argues that modern religious leaders are completely failing to research this actual truth, and they're relying entirely on just passing down old knowledge. And this brilliantly illustrates the human cost of that failure. Because these institutions don't research truth, their congregations have kind of devolved. On one side, we've got blind followers, people basically trapped by gods who just bow, pay tithes, and obey without ever really questioning the root of their own suffering. The speaker argues we need to snap out of that and instead become active researchers, people who critically analyze the root causes of human hardship to find those real, universal solutions. Okay, moving to a much bigger picture. Section 3, South Korea's historical mission. In this section, the lecture zooms way out, connecting this entire global spiritual deficit directly to the destiny of South Korea. And at the very heart of this destiny is a crucial cultural concept called Hongik Ingan. This translates roughly to individuals or leaders whose ultimate purpose is to broadly benefit all of humanity. The speaker firmly believes that South Koreans are, quote, descendants of heaven, uniquely positioned and meant to embody this exact ideal on the world stage. The lecture actually lays out a highly specific 4-step destiny for the nation. Step 1, absorb all global knowledge and culture, which the speaker says South Korea has successfully done. Step 2, analyze the suffering of those who flock to religions. Step 3, use that analysis to discover the universal truth. And step 4, share those answers to heal humanity. However, the speaker argues that South Korea has currently completely stalled. Instead of discovering the truth and helping humanity, the highly educated elites have just become arrogant with all that absorbed knowledge. Which leads us perfectly into Section 4,
the generational sacrifices.
To even get to that first step of absorbing global knowledge, the source argues it took a massive, vastly unequal sacrifice, primarily borne by South Korea's baby boomer generation. And the lecture provides a really specific, almost startling observation about this era. During the absolute hardest times of national growth, the first wave of people seeking religious help was overwhelmingly female. We're talking about 80% women to 20% men. The speaker explains that men were being sent out to perform intense physical labor to build the economy, while the women were left to manage the intense domestic hardship and spiritual strain. That immense pressure drove them in massive numbers to churches and temples, just seeking some kind of relief.
Let's move to the structural view to see how society's sacrifice actually builds up. The speaker outlines how lower-educated citizens literally sacrifice their lives. Think about it. Those with only primary or middle school education completely gave up their futures to work, do hard labor, and financially support their siblings. That's the maximum sacrifice. High school graduates made a moderate sacrifice. And all of this was specifically designed to push the top 30% through university. That top tier absorbed the world's knowledge with minimum sacrifice, specifically so they could eventually lead and find the truth. But again, the speaker fiercely laments that this top tier totally failed to do the research required to heal society. Bringing it all back home, Section 5, Curing the Confused Soul.
Zooming back in from that huge macro-societal view down to the micro level of individual human suffering, the lecture agitates a really core problem. If modern religions only offer stagnant knowledge and medical doctors are only equipped to fix the physical body, well, who is left to cure the soul? According to the source, the modern world has absolutely no real cure for our deepest internal struggles. The speaker draws a very stark, very clear division here. On one side is physical disease. These are material issues, right? Broken bones, cellular damage, organ failure. Medical doctors and scientists are absolutely fantastic at repairing this material damage. But on the other side is spiritual sickness. This is a non-material confusion. When your inner self is just tangled and lost, you become a true patient. And the tragic part is, when these patients go to hospitals, their bodies might get patched up, but their non-material spiritual sickness is sent away completely unhealed. To explain how this happens, the source redefines two terms we hear all the time: spirit and soul. The spirit, or Jeong, is defined as your true core energy. It's your divine self that simply resides inside your physical body like it's a tool. But the soul, or Hong, is described almost as a form of chaos. It's the confusion and tangled energy created when we absorb the conflicting, messy thoughts and dogmas of everybody else. So mental anguish actually happens when our pure spirit becomes totally overwhelmed and tangled by this chaotic external noise. The speaker leaves us with a very severe final warning regarding this spiritual sickness. Quote, "If we don't solve this, we will live like beggars and end our lives as blind followers bowing to gods." It's intense, right? The source firmly believes that without dedicating ourselves to active research, without doing the work to untangle that chaotic soul and find universal truth, we are just doomed to ultimate ruin, constantly living way beneath our true potential. And it leaves us with a truly powerful, provocative question to reflect on as we wrap up. Are we actively researching the truth of our own suffering, trying to understand the actual root causes of our pain? Or have we simply become blind followers, just hoping some stagnant piece of knowledge will magically fix a tangled spirit? It's a really fascinating perspective on personal responsibility and spiritual independence. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. I really hope it sparked your curiosity and gave you something deeply interesting to think about today.